Welcome to the second week of our new message series for a new year, which is all about stories. We all like stories. A story is a recounting of an event or a series of events. It is a narrative, and we love stories. It's true for all of us all of the time. From the time that we're a child, we love stories. Good stories engage us. They can entertain us. They can teach us and change us. And every once in a while, a story will inspire us. The reason we like stories is simple. Our lives are stories. Your life is a story. You are living a story right now. So what could possibly be more interesting to you than that? Now, you've already lived part of your story, and maybe probably those past stories of yours have given shape to what's going on now. And by the same token, what's going on now will influence your story moving forward. One day, this time of your life and how you choose to live it and what choices you're making will be a story that you could tell to others or that others could tell about you. Now, when we watch a movie or we read a novel and we're introduced to a story, we meet characters who are making decisions. And we've got a perspective on the decisions that they're making that maybe they don't even have for themselves. Perhaps, because of the way the story is arranged, we understand the arc of a story in a way the characters themselves don't. And so we know what they should be doing and what decisions they really should be making. And that is exactly what we don't have in our own lives oftentimes. So often we're making decisions without any understanding of how it connects to everything else that we've got going on. So we can fall into dumb choices and cycles of bad decisions that we just keep repeating over and over and over again because we're operating in the dark. And we don't have anybody to blame for it but ourselves, because we've never slowed down enough to understand our story and to see how our present fits into our past and emerges from it, and how it is leading and inexorably moving forward into our future. We've never slowed down enough to consider our stories matter. Our story is important. Your story is important. Your story matters, but not perhaps in the way you might expect. Your story isn't important because of you. In fact, I'm sorry to say, but I got to tell you, you're not even the central character in your story. Your story isn't important because of you. Your story is important because of God and His role in your story. God is the central character in your story, and you'll never even understand your story unless and until you appreciate His place in it. Unless and until you appreciate the larger story that God is telling. Well, the choice you have is whether or not you want to do that. Whether you only want to live your own little tiny story that you can spin for yourself, or whether you want your story to be a part of that bigger story that God invites you to be a part of. Two very different approaches to life, leading to two entirely different outcomes. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about those outcomes today. And to begin, we're going to begin with the very beginning of our story. About a year and a half ago, my brother and sister-in-law had a baby, beautiful little baby girl, absolutely perfect, and she's named Elizabeth. But unfortunately, she was never baptized. Don't ask me why. I don't know. I wasn't told. Have no idea why. You know, church isn't always the greatest priority for everyone in my family. I don't know if you have family members like that, but I do. So the kid was never baptized. I mean, she's 15 months old. She goes to music lessons. She goes to swim class. But they never found time to baptize her. So more recently, and very gently, I made the suggestion that as long as everybody was going to be together for Christmas, why don't we go ahead and baptize her over the holidays? Otherwise, I'll do it myself in the kitchen sink. So they agreed. You know, there's a very good reason why people baptize infants and not toddlers, and it is a reason that is not a religious reason. It is because mostly infants don't notice and don't care when you're doing stuff like you have to do to them at a baptism, all the anointings and, you know, the blessings and the candle and the water and all that stuff. On the other hand, a kid who is a year and a half old is not going to let you do whatever you want to do to her, at least not without a fight. So we had a fight. She didn't just cry. Crying would have been okay. Crying would have been understandable. Crying would have been a pleasant alternative to what we experienced in this baptism. In fact, this baptism didn't even feel like a baptism. It felt more like an exorcism. Did you ever see that movie, The Exorcist? No, that was me. That was me in this baptism. That's my experience. I'm pretty sure that we had the 360-degree head spinning going on, and the pea soup projectile vomiting, and the demoniac screeching in foreign languages. It was an exorcism. Take a look. Now that's a before picture. But now she's a Christian. Today is a feast celebrating baptism. It is the baptism of the Lord. The baptism of the Lord remembers the beginning of Jesus' ministry, the beginning of his story. And right from the beginning of his story, it's placed in the context of a bigger story. The story God the Father is telling. The Bible says Jesus also had been baptized and was praying. Then heaven opened, and the Holy Spirit descended upon him in bodily form like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my beloved Son, with you I am well pleased." Well, from time to time throughout the Bible, God just stops everything to remind us that he's there, that he's creator and sustainer and ruler of absolutely everything, all that we see, all that we have and hold, all that we're grateful for, and everything we take for granted too. It's only here because he chose to create it and then give it to us. Faith 101 is simply this: there's a God, and it's not you. I'm only here because God created me. You're only here because God created you. And if you think about it, when he did, there were lots of other choices he made at that time too. Think about the issues of your life that are beyond your control, that you had absolutely no say over, that God simply assigned to you. You know, you had no control over when you were born or where, the environment in which you were born, whether it was in poverty or affluence or somewhere in between. You had nothing to say about what you looked like. You had no control over who your parents are or which siblings were assigned to you and what was the birth order. You had no control over your general personality. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert is not something you decided for yourself. You had no control over your talents and gifts and interests or abilities and most of your preferences. All of that was assigned to you by God. Now, by no means am I saying that everything that happened to you as a kid or a child was what God wanted for you or God's best for you, because it wasn't. There were lots of things perhaps that happened to you that were quite aside from God's will or even against it. But what I am saying is this: you didn't start your story. And besides everybody else that might have been involved in it, God was involved. God is responsible. God is the original author of your life. And it is critically important that you recognize that and know it and grow in appreciation and understanding of it so that you know the real story you're in. You know, a lot of people's problems come down to this problem. They don't know their story. They don't know what story they're operating in. They get confused about it. Maybe they think they're in some other story, and then things start going wrong, and problems ensue. God is the original author of your life. And it's critically important that you understand that so that you know the real story you're in. God is the author of your life, not you and not me. If I was the author of my life, I would have started my story in a penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, because that's always where I wanted to live. My story actually started in an old white farmhouse on the edge of my grandfather's farm in South Jersey. If I was the author of my story, Jacqueline Kennedy would have been my mother. Steve Jobs would have been my father. If I was the author of my story, I'd be tall. I'd be fast on my feet. I'd be incredibly clever with comebacks. I would be brilliant with technology, and I would have straight hair. If I was the author of my story, my earliest memories would be precious. They would be magical. They would be special. They're not. They're incredibly mundane. My earliest memory is sitting on the back steps of our old farmhouse. My shoe had come off, and for some reason, that made me very sad. And I was trying to put that shoe back on when my father decided that this was such a precious moment, he wanted to capture it. He started taking my picture, which was incredibly annoying. And I remember feeling increasing frustration with myself because I couldn't get that shoe back on. An immense, growing irritation with my father because he was exploiting this moment. Finally, I gave up on trying to put the shoe back on. I took it and threw it at him. It's important to invest time in knowing your story or getting to know it better. You know, if you do, I guarantee you, you will learn more, far more, than you ever thought you would. And it might surprise you. You might be surprised at what you learn. To help you get started, we've posted some questions on our website. It's a place to begin sorting out the beginning of your story. Where did it start? What happened? What happened to you? What happened to you? Think about it. And as you do, form that exercise into a conversation with God. Honestly, share with Him your emotions about what happened to you. Because probably you have feelings about it, maybe even strong feelings. Your emotions might be clearer to you than the facts of what happened, depending upon your story. Think about it. You think about your parents, and perhaps you're grateful that God gave them to you. Or you think about the neighborhood that you grew up in, or the school where you went to school, and they're all good memories, and they make you smile, and they make you laugh. Or you think about your siblings, and how happy you are to have them along with you on the journey that is your life. Or maybe you look back to other kinds of emotions. Maybe you feel very different kinds of feelings. You feel frustration, or you feel anger or distress. Maybe you're looking back with confusion or distress. Did you know that God has insight into your story that you don't, and you won't without His help? He can help you understand your story better. And a good way to start tapping into those insights is to share your feelings with him. Just turn to him and talk about what happened to you and how you feel about what happened to you. Just say it. I feel sad. I feel sorry. I feel angry. You know, you can just go ahead and say it. God, how could you have let that happen to me? Why would you let that happen to me? I'm angry at you because of what happened to me. Go ahead and say it. He can take it. It's okay. He's God. And for some of you, talking like that to God will open up a kind of conversation, a level of conversation you've never had before with God. It will change your relationship with him. Do it. And as you do, as you explore the beginning of your story, remember, it's not the beginning of your story that matters most anyway. It's important, of course, because it establishes the context and the theme and some of the patterns that follow. It matters. But it's not what's most important. Not at all. What's most important is not the beginning of your story or the circumstances that you found yourself in or what people did to you. What matters most is what you do. And what you do next. And then what you do after that. Understanding the beginning of your story helps you write a better story moving forward. And whoever you are, and whatever stage or state of life you're in, you can have a better story moving forward. Think about any story that you've ever heard. Sure, it starts at some particular place because the story necessarily has to. But then it can go anywhere. A great story can go anywhere. Oh, one other thing. As you begin that conversation with God this week about your story, keep in mind what he's already told you, what you should know already about your story, because he told us, he said, "You are my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased." That's you. That's your story. That's where your story starts. You are the beloved Son. You are the beloved daughter of the Almighty Sovereign God. That's your story. He's pleased with you. Maybe he's not always pleased with everything you do, but he's pleased with you because he formed you just the way he wants you to be.